Morning.
Morning.
Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Thank you. Intertestamental Period of History. And today we are in lesson 10 of our studies. And we are studying about the Persian Empire. Lasted from 539 BC down to 331 BC. We are near the end of the Persian Empire. We got two kings to go today because that's how I decided to approach this study, is to go by the rulers and just kind of put it in perspective. We're not doing a deep dive historically. We're just kind of getting an overview of it and trying as much as possible to connect it to the nation, I guess you would say, to Judea and to the Jews, especially, after the exile, but those in that period of time as they're, and we're going to be heading in, or we have headed into that 400 years of prophetic silence. So I hope you've enjoyed the study so far. Again, the next couple kings that we're looking at doesn't have a lot to do with Judea and the Jewish people. When we get on in over to the Grecian Empire, it'll pick up a little bit more. But then when we get done with the Greek, there's going to be a period where we're going to look at the Maccabean period, and we'll have a lot of material on that. I've decided to really hit that strong, a little more historical, and that'll help us to understand the things going on with the Jewish people prior to the Roman Empire and then the coming of the Christ, the Messiah. So in our lesson today, again, it's the Persian Empire, and we're going to look at a man by the name of Arses. He is also known as Artaxerxes IV, and he reigned from November of 338 BC to June of 336 BC. I may have had some numbers, I think I said there was like 7 years, 6 years. I forget just what I said last week about the years, but these may be better numbers. Yeah, I even had, better numbers than what I had last week. Don't worry about it. Again, numbers are the years. Sometimes scholars are all over the place with it, so we're not going to worry too much about it. But down to 336 BC. And we talked a little bit last week. Let me just go back. You were introduced to this man by the name of Bagoas, who was Artaxerxes III's chief advisor. And he poisoned Artaxerxes III and elevated Arses to the throne. So that's how we're getting him now, looking at his reign. His father, Artaxerxes III, and his older brothers and sisters had been poisoned by Bagoas. Bagoas was a confidential minister to Artaxerxes III and commander-in-chief of the Persian forces in the conquest of Egypt in 343 BC. They finally took Egypt. It took a long time for the Persians to take Egypt. Didn't last very long, but they finally defeated them. But Bagoas became a rich and powerful person. How did he do that? Well, he gained his wealth and his power by selling artifacts looted from Egyptian temples back to the priests at exorbitant prices. In other words, he was a robber of temples. And that was considered very low in biblical terms. You go through I forget where there's a reference, but there's a reference in the scriptures, we didn't rob temples, We're not that bad of a people. But here, Bagoas didn't mind doing that. He also worked in close partnership with a Grecian general, mentor of Rhodes, to gain political power. Now, if you remember where Rhodes was, there was a great statue in Rhodes. It was a giant, huge thing. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the statue of Rhodes. Well, anyway, this Grecian general was there, and he worked with this Grecian general in a geopolitical sense, to destabilize and gain power. So he was a very, very evil person. And in 338 BC, Bagoas again had murdered Artaxerxes III, poisoned him, and placed Arses on the throne. 2 years later, in 336 BC, Arses objected to the tyrannical control of Bagoas and attempted to poison him. Instead, Arses and his children were killed, and Bagoas gave the throne to a collateral heir, Darius III. So you see the intrigue that's going on in the palace, so to speak. How you've got this advisor, and he's killing off people and putting other people in power. And then the people in power say, wait a minute, I'm the king, and the king goes to poison, he's going to, he doesn't want to relinquish power. He's going to get rid of this guy, and this guy has him killed and all his family. And he appoints somebody else. Who's the true power here in all of this? What a terrible situation it seems to be. So that's what's going on in Persia. So you can see, now how many times do we see in the book of Proverbs, if you go back and you read that, and you see how people can become evil in the way that they think and the way that they do things, and especially in politics like this, the greed, the lust for power, the lust for money, all of it plays into this. This is what's happening, and when the book of Proverbs talks about advisors and counselors and such, and if you have an evil counselor, what's going to happen to your kingdom? It's going to be short-lived, and here you have a year and a half of a reign of a king because of an evil counselor. Now, in this time period in world history, which is pretty important, in 338 BC, about the time that Arses, or Artaxerxes IV, comes to power, Philip II of Macedon defeated the Greek city-states of Athens and Thebes in the Battle of Chaeronea. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Right? And this is important. We talked before how that Athens and some of the city-states of Greece, and that was their democracy. Remember, that's the central part of democracy, that we're free, our states are free, we vote and we put people in power, we don't have dictators, we don't do this, we don't do that. But there was a weakness because they were very small. But it's only when they came together and stood together that they had any hope of fending off invading armies and such. Persia had been, a couple hundred years, it seems like, invading and trying to destroy them. It's only when they come together that they would defeat them, finally to get to the point where Athens, such, are making alliances with them. And Philip II of Macedon takes that as a threat. Well, you're making an alliance with them to have peace, but where does that put me in Macedonia? That puts me on the chopping block, so to speak. I'm out here all by myself. So what he does in 337 BC, he had formed a federation of Greek states and was elected commander-in-chief. And then he goes against these other Greek states and he defeats them. That kind of consolidates power in what we would see today, or maybe not today, but before, with Greece. Because even today you have a Macedonia that's taken the north part of the Baltic area of Greece. Well, as soon as he gets that federation formed, well, 338 BC, the next year, 337, he forms a federation. Then he begins plans to invade the Persian Empire. Well, why does he want to do that? It may not necessarily be that he wants to take them over, but he wants to get that buffer zone. Remember how we talked about the Pharaoh of Egypt comes up through and starts attacking up into Media, the area of the Medes? What's that do? It cuts the Persian Empire in two if he's successful. Well, what Philip probably wants to do is regain those cities along the coast of Asia Minor and push back a buffer zone. Much like Russia is trying to do today. Keep that buffer zone between them and Europe so that Germany cannot attack them once again. So in 336 BC, Philip was assassinated by a royal bodyguard. And it's supposed that Darius III had something to do with this. We'll talk about that later. But his son, Alexander, who becomes Alexander the Great, then ascends to the throne and carries out his father's ambitions to invade Persia. And starts there, crosses the Hellespont, goes down, takes those cities in Asia Minor. Talk about that because that has a little bit to do with New Testament geography and history also. So that's the world history of that, what, a year and a half, so to speak, or 3 years. You know, there's a lot happening there. Then Darius III was the last king, and he reigned from 336 to 330 BC. And we say 330, but he lived down to 330. 331 is actually when the last battle is fought, but he dies in 330. 331's the last battle. So he's the last king of this Persian Empire, the Achaemenid dynasty. And he was placed on the throne by Bagoas. But when Darius III asserted his independence, Bagoas, what does he do?
He tries to poison him.
He attempts to poison him, but the king was wise to his attempt and forced Bagoas to drink the poison himself. All right, I said, very, very good, very good. Then in 337 BC, Philip had formed that League of Corinth to liberate Greek cities under Persian rule. And in 336 BC, he sent an advanced force into Asia Minor. Let's get those cities there on the coast. A lot of these cities are what we read about in the book of Revelation, right? The 7 cities, of Asia Minor, of Asia. In July, though, of 336, he was assassinated. And again, perhaps at the instigation of Darius III. Then in the spring of 334 BC, Alexander the Great crossed the Hellespont.
Where's the Hellespont at?
That's that little narrow, I think I showed it to you before. That's 57. Right up here. It might be easier up here, but this area, I believe, is the Hellespont. So you have Sardis, Lydia, Ephesus, these towns down in here. They want to recapture those on the coast. That's where the money's at because of shipping on the Mediterranean. And you start by cutting off Persia's ability to have a navy out here. So it's here, take down through here, cut it off. If you rule the Mediterranean, you rule you rule the known world at that time. Okay, so does that help you? Okay, back to 57. So in the spring of 334 BC, Alexander the Great crossed the Hellespont. Darius III made no serious preparations to resist the invasion. For whatever reason, he just gave them the area, which is probably a big mistake, but it worked out well for Western civilization. Alexander defeated a Persian army at the Granicus, whatever that is, whether that's a river or whatever, but a Persian army. When finally Darius sends somebody, and by 333 BC, Alexander had taken most of Asia Minor and reached Cilicia. Now, what is Cilicia?
Kind of town, wasn't it?
Well, it was a region in southern Asia Minor, where Saul of Tarsus was from. Of course, that's going to be, 300 years later. But you see how those areas play such an important part in world history and biblical history. So he reaches that far down into Asia Minor. Darius finally met Alexander's forces at Issus in the fall of 333 BC. But Darius fled from the battlefield, abandoning his mother, wife, and children.
What a coward.
Yeah. October 1st, 331 BC, the Battle of Gaugamela, not guacamole. We had tacos earlier, but this is not guacamole. Gaugamela decided the fate of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. The plain of Gaugamela is northeast of Nineveh across the Tigris from what is now Mosul, Iraq. Well, what's interesting about Mosul, Iraq to our modern day thinking?
They're always fighting.
1990, 91, Desert Storm. Mosul was one of the chief cities that we had to take. Very bloody combat in Mosul. Darius III chose this place to meet Alexander's forces. So as he's looking at it, he's planning, he's looking at the battlefield, and he says, where am I going to? And I'm going here. Here's the battle. And he goes there, he sets up his forces. And historians agree that the Persians outnumbered the Macedonians greatly. And as the battle proceeded, Persian losses were heavy. Darius fled to Bactria, where he was assassinated by Besus in 330 BC. So he loses the battle in 331, but again, he flees, he runs, but he's assassinated in 330 BC. So the Macedonian victory meant the end of the Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great a little over 200 years earlier, and propelled Alexander to be the master of the ANE. What's ANE mean? Do you remember what I told you? If you're reading material about this time period, what does that mean?
Asian something.
Ancient Near East. The ancient Near East. All right, so there you have the end of the Persian Empire. So summary, just a summary of this very quickly as we end up this morning. Hey, quick class this morning, right? I didn't know we'd get through it, but you might have some questions. Maybe. So the Medo-Persian Empire existed and ruled the ANE, Ancient Near East world, for about 208 years. It was ruled over by 15 prominent rulers, from Cyrus in 539 BC to Darius III in 331 BC. We've looked at all 15 prominent ones, plus who? You got to remember that one.
Pseudo.
Smyrtus, okay? There's an abundance of historical and archaeological evidence of this empire. An abundance. They're still digging over there and finding stuff. Danny lets me have the BAR, Biblical Archaeological Review or something like that, and yeah, they're just digging over there all the time, finding stuff. Perhaps the greatest achievement for the world was making law an objective standard. In other words, law wasn't at the whim of the ruler. You didn't have a law made today and, all right, today Lance is going to be put to death for chewing gum, and tomorrow, okay, it's all right for Denise to chew gum. You say, no, if it's wrong to chew gum, you get put to death for it. That's what it is, the whole objective standards of law. See, and that's something we're losing in our nation today. It's an objective standard of law. One person gets away with whatever, the other person gets charged for it. Something's wrong there. But see, that even goes back to the law of Moses. And that's why scholars are finding more and more, and I shouldn't say finding more and more, but how do I want to put it? Emphasizing more and more that the Bible is the kind of the seed for Western civilization, even though it was produced in the ancient Near East, because all of those principles come forth to guide Western civilization to what we have known it to have been. And now that Eastern culture is making its way in to where anything goes. It's the whims of the dictator. Whoever's in power gets to make the rules and change the rules. There's no absolutes. None. None. You know, the founding fathers said that, talked about nature, the laws of nature and nature's God. But to them, oh, we're all powerful. It's whatever, whoever has the power gets to make the decisions. And so it's really, we're going back to the destructive chaos that ruled the world before the flood and not too long after the flood. Number 5, Medo-Persian attacks on Europe introduced the descendants of Japheth to world and biblical history. I don't know. Can you see that as you read the Bible? And I'm not saying that in the sense to elevate white Europeans over anybody, because the Bible doesn't do that. All men are created equal. We all go back to the same ancestors, right? Noah is our great-great-great-great-grandfather regardless, and then on back you go to Adam and Eve. Period. So it doesn't matter, but culturally, this is the beginning, bless you, this is the beginning where you see that Western culture, and if you study about the Greek periods, since we got a little bit of time, this is going to be part of a lessons later. You have the Bronze Age. You have the start of what's called the Minoan civilization. That's early Greeks. That's what the Bible, I believe, talks about. Javan, Javan, in the Hebrew it'd be Aven, or Havin. Those people there. But you have the Dark Ages of Greece and the fall of Mycenaean culture. What happens? I don't know when the volcano. Was that Pompeii? Or not Pompeii? Was it Pompeii?
Pompeii.
Yeah. But you have a couple things happen. You had the Trojan Wars, destruction of Troy. But then all of a sudden, look, development of the Greek alphabet. You have the Olympic Games. You have things happening, and now you've got men like Aristotle, Socrates, Pericles. You've got all this stuff coming together, but what's causing that to come together? Well, back at 1000, David became king of Israel. And all the nations around were suddenly saying, wow, look what God is doing, the God of the Hebrews, the God of Israel. And then when Solomon comes along, there's trade going everywhere. Development of the Greek alphabet. Do you know how closely that follows the Hebrew alphabet? Where did they learn to write? Where did they learn some of the philosophical terms? Who was the greatest philosopher in ancient times?
Those two cultures developed parallel the Hebrew and the Greek, didn't they? Pretty much.
To a degree, but who was the greatest philosopher back then? A little bit before the Greeks. A man by the name of King Solomon.
Oh, I was going to say
Oh,
that.
okay. Yeah.
Okay? Medicine. Where did the Greeks get their concept of medicine? The Bible. Yeah, they had the different gods, but then they started talking about, well, wait a minute, there must be one who's outside of this. There's got to be, you know, if this world is created, there has to be a creator. And they come up with the concept of logos. Who's logos? In the beginning was logos. And logos was with God, and logos was God. All things were created by him. Logos. And John is saying, hey, you Greeks, the one that you come up with, this logos, you thought about it, you come up with that concept, I want to tell you about him. Here he is. And the logos became a human being. He dwelt among us, we beheld his glory. Here he is. But you see those different periods of times, and they'll talk about classical Greek, and they'll talk about, very rich. But here, at the time of Alexander especially, is the time that the Greeks come into this, you know, here's the Bible, and this Greek culture that's growing, and growing because of it. And even back to the times in Egypt, at the time of the exile, Jews, this is in 586 BC, there were Jews that went to Egypt, and later on the place where they assembled, lived in Egypt, you know what it's called? Alexandria. You know why? They became Greek-speaking Jews. And where was the great library at?
Alexandria.
Alexandria. That's where knowledge blossomed. Why? I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. But it was because of the Jews who came there and studied, because they had a right concept of the universe, and an orderly universe, not a chaotic universe, an orderly universe. They were able to put these things together, and people would come from all over the world to study there, and then they'd take it home and develop. And what did the Eastern culture want to do? They wanted to destroy that.
Knowledge is power.
Yes. You destroy that knowledge. Why are they fighting on the college campuses today and promoting anti-Semitism?
Lack of knowledge.
Well, no, it's anti-knowledge. It's not orderly, okay? It doesn't proceed from one God, okay? Even though they would say it's Allah, okay? It's power. Power. And power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. We're not getting our way. We'll just destroy it. We'll destroy not. They're destroying they're trying to destroy the foundations that this nation's built upon. Because as long as this nation exists, as long as Israel exists, even though I don't believe that Israel is a theocracy, as some would represent, but there are Jews who do believe that there is one God, monotheistic, and that laws apply. Okay? There are Jews who don't. There are Jews who they're for the enemy. Just as there are Christians who are for the enemy. No, they're supposed to be Christians, but they're for the enemy. You see the point that I'm making? All of this is a continuation of what has been going on for centuries. And as we're studying it, we see it. We should be seeing it.
Pull this up, is that, so when you talk about the Medo-Persians, they controlled, if this is a correct map, they controlled all of that,
Right, right.
even Egypt.
And if we would understand it and stop calling it Iran and start calling it Persia. It's Persia, yeah, the modern name's Iran, but it's Persia. The Persians want to control all of that. They want to reestablish the Persian Empire and expand it as much as possible. Anyway, all right. Do you have questions on what we've been looking at? And so we got down to 59. And next week, there's a review of what we've been looking at. Okay, so here's where we'll start next week, and then we'll go into part number 5, Grecian Empire.